Okay, so we've moved on to the next section, Torah reading, just to see where we're at in general. We're in the section of prayer after starting the day, and we're going through the different sections of the prayer. The Torah reading is actually a mitzvah in its own right, so we're almost finished going through all the sections of prayer. We're here in section 23, and yesterday we did the first 3 halachas. We firstly spoke about how the Torah is brought to the bima, and then the next 7 halachas speak about the process of getting an aliyah, which is quite relevant for anybody that goes to shul, for that frightening moment when you're standing there and you're hoping that you're not going to make any mistakes in front of the whole shul. If you do, that's fine. But we're running through it so that you are so that you're fully involved, so that you know exactly what to do. So here we go, section number 4. So we spoke about going to the bimba, and we said one should take the shortest route. We spoke about the actual process of making the brachas, how you first look at what you're making a bracha on, and if you can, kiss it, and then you make the bracha. You first roll the Torah closed, or you can leave it open if you close your eyes, and then the Baal Korah reads from the Torah, and when he finishes, you roll it closed and you make the after bracha. That was that in short. That was making the brachas. And we are now up to section number 4. Yes. Okay, it is forbidden to hold the Sefer Torah, meaning the actual parchment, with bare hands. So you wouldn't actually touch it with your finger. Also, sometimes what could happen is if it's a big Torah, when you're rolling it up, the parchment can slide on the side. So you'd want to pick it up so that you could roll it correctly, but you would actually need to use a talus or some kind of material to pick it up out of respect for the Torah, because the Torah is understandably very holy. So you can hold the Torah with a talus or hold it by its atzei chayim, its poles. There are some who refrain from touching even the poles with bare hands, only with the talus, meaning even when you're holding the Torah to make the bracha, some people would only hold that with the talus as well, although that is not the prevalent custom. So that is as far as not touching it. Now, the Oila, meaning the person that was called up, Oleh means to go up, just like Aliyah means to go up to Israel. So the person who receives an Aliyah, who goes up, as well as the person reading from the Torah, are required to stand. It is even forbidden to lean on something. So you're up there by the bimba, you might want to just put your hand down and lean as you're going along, but we don't do that. Why? For we must stand in awe. For just as the Torah was given in awe, so too must we conduct ourselves concerning it in awe. However, certainly a weak person would be allowed to lean for support, meaning if you need it from a health perspective, you certainly can, but one shouldn't be lax in front of the Torah, because really, Hashem didn't just give us the Torah a few thousand years ago. Every day he gives us the Torah anew, and when one has the opportunity to receive an aliyah, it is as if, not just as if, in some way Hashem is at that moment re-giving us the Torah. And certainly if we were there by Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments, we would feel the awe and the greatness of Hashem before whom we stand. And similarly, when one receives an aliyah, one should be in tune with the great holiness of the moment, and therefore should stand up without leaning on anything. That's number 5. Number 6. So this is as far as when the person that receives the aliyah, what he should do. As far as the congregation, so when the person receiving the aliyah says, Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMevarach, so everybody responds, Baruch Hashem HaMevarach L'olam Va'ed. Now that initial start, that opening, let us bless Hashem forever, should be done standing. We don't see it as common practice, but even if you were to just it's just one phrase, even if as he said, Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMevarach, and he said, Baruch Hashem HaMevarach L'olam Va'ed, you just kind of lifted yourself slightly off the chair, then that would work. Meaning it's not like a time where everybody needs to formally stand up and then sit down. But for that opening clause of the person getting an aliyah, one should stand. But once he says the continued bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Hashem b'char banu mikol ha'amim, and the bracha that comes afterwards, everybody may be seated, as well as during the Torah reading, everyone may be seated. Those who are scrupulous in the observance of mitzvahs demand more of themselves and stand, and this is appropriate, meaning some people stand the entire time that the Torah is being read, not only in the specific time that we just mentioned. It is worth mentioning that as far as those that have the custom to stand during the Torah reading, so there is a distinction made whether the Torah is on a bimah or not. Because if the Torah is on a bimah, which is a certain height, then it may be considered like it's in its own halachic space. And since you're not in the same halachic space as the Torah, that would be an additional reason why it would be okay to sit. But the bottom line is that you can be seated during the Torah reading, and this obviously takes a while. Some have the custom to stand. Okay. However, between the readings, meaning after the person finished getting his aliyah, while maybe they're making a mishabeirach, giving him all the brachos or whatever it is, then there's no reason to stand. You may certainly be seated. So that is as far as when the congregation stands. Okay. If the reader himself is called up to the Torah, so usually you have the person that receives the aliyah, and then you have the person that's reading the aliyah on his behalf. But if those two people are the same person, meaning the Baal Koira, the person that is reading from the Torah, is the one that was called up to receive the aliyah, so technically he would be able to be there on the bimah by himself. However, just as when Hashem first gave us the Torah, he gave it to us with Moshe, so it was the two of them. Similarly, whenever a person receives the Torah on the bimah, they should be accompanied by somebody else, meaning there should always be at least two people on the bimah, the person receiving the aliyah and somebody else as well. And some people have a point of having a person on both sides of the bimah, but I'm not sure if that is necessary. Number 8, not talking. So once the reader has begun to read, the entire congregation is forbidden to indulge in conversation, even about Torah subjects. While we are hearing the Torah being read, there is no license to talk at all. Conversation is forbidden even between readings, meaning we shouldn't even be talking between one aliyah and the next. It is forbidden to leave the synagogue while the Torah is being read, to just walk out in the middle. Imagine you're busy receiving the Torah from heaven and somebody decides to just take a walk. So that is disrespectful. But between readings, between one aliyah and the next, while the Torah is closed, that would be an opportunity for somebody to go out if they needed to. Okay. So this whole first section dealt with the process of receiving an aliyah. In the next section, we're going to discuss who gets an aliyah and when. So how the aliyahs are distributed. This next section would be more relevant for the gabbai or somebody who's giving out the aliyahs, but we will go through it so that at least you could be familiar as well as to how things operate, why it is that sometimes you are called up or you're not called up, or when you're called up. So let's discuss all of that over the next couple of halachas. Okay, so if there is a kohen present in the synagogue, in shul, he needs to be called up first. So why is that? Just as when Moshe wrote the Torah down and he came down from the mountain, he first taught it to the Kohanim, the sons of the Leviim. So similarly, when we read the Torah, we start off by giving that honor to the Kohanim. Now, once upon a time, a Torah sage would even receive priority over a Kohen, meaning if there was somebody that was well-versed in the wisdom of Hashem, he would receive the very first aliyah. But today, we're not well-versed in who is considered a Torah sage and who's not considered a Torah sage, and we certainly don't want to cause machlokes. So now, under all circumstances, a kohen is always called up to the Torah first. Even if he is an unlearned
No,
person,
now I'm listening. Sorry, I can't talk.
provided he is an upright person, he has preference over the Torah scholar, meaning as long as he is eligible to receive an aliyah, he must be given the aliyah first. Even if the Kohen wants to forego his right, he may not do so, meaning that it isn't just a matter of choice. Do I want to receive the aliyah or not? Rather, this is something that the Kohen, it's the special merit that he has, that he cannot say, no, it's okay, give somebody else a chance. If he's there, he needs to receive the aliyah. After the Kohen, a Levi is called up. So, Kohanim are all Leviim, but Leviim aren't all Kohanim. Let me explain. All of the Jewish people are referred to as Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel. Who was the first Israel? Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's other name was Israel. So when we refer to the Jewish people as the sons of Israel, we are referring to the Jewish people as all coming from Jacob, from Israel, the other name for Jacob. Now Jacob had 12 sons, and each of these 12 sons ended up taking a different section of the land of Israel. These were the 12 tribes. One of his 12 sons was called Levi. And Levi and his family were separated to dedicate their lives to serving Hashem. And they actually did not receive a portion of the land of Israel, an equal division like all the others. They only had specific cities because they had to dedicate their lives towards Hashem. Now, within the family of Leviim, some of that tribe became Kohanim, and some didn't until they remained Leviim. So the first person to get an aliyah would be a Kohen, and second would be somebody else from the Levi family who is not a Kohen. If there's no Levi present, the Kohen who was called first is called again in the Levi stead. So you'll actually have one person receiving two aliyahs, one after the other. First, the Kohen will receive the aliyah that he received as a Kohen, and then he will receive a second aliyah in place of the absence of a Levi. And the Gabbai would announce, instead of a Levi, Bimkoim Levi. So the Kohen would receive two aliyahs.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
What happens if there's no Kohen?
So that's going to be addressed in just a second.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. So the Gemara
I've got a Kohen question. You say the same Kohen. If you've got 3 or 4 Kohanim in the, would it still always be the same one, or would you be able to give it to a different Kohen?
So it must be the same one. So the Gemara, when discussing this, actually asks that we have a principle that you never call up one Kohen after another. Why not? Because if you're going to call up one Kohen and then you're going to call up another Kohen, now usually the Kohen only receives the first aliyah. So if you're first going to call Yankel HaKohen and then you're going to call Shmuel HaKohen, people are going to say, Yankel is obviously not a real Kohen. Something must be going on in his family. Because remember, if a Kohen marries somebody that he's not allowed to marry, then his child is no longer a Kohen. So if you're going to call up Kohen A and then Kohen B, people are going to say, oh, Kohen A obviously wasn't a Kohen, so they had to call up somebody else instead. So there must be stuff going on in the first Kohen's family. We thought he's a Kohen, but maybe something went on with his parents, and really he lost the status of Kohen. And therefore the Gemara says one is never allowed to call one Kohen up after another Kohen. And the Gemara actually asks, if so, how are we allowing the same Kohen to receive two aliyahs? Because we have a principle that Kohen is never given twice. And the Gemara answers, well, it's quite understandable because this is talking about the very same person. So you're not going to say that the first aliyah was disqualified, so you called this guy up instead, because he is the very same person. So there's no such concern. So yes, only the same Kohen would be able to receive the second aliyah, because if you were to call up another Kohen, then it would undermine, it would put question in the eyes of the public in the perspective of the first Kohen. Okay.
Thanks.
Now to you, John.
Yeah.
If a Kohen is not present in the synagogue, then either a Levi or a Yisrael is called in his stead. Okay, as long as a Kohen is there, he has to be called up. But if a Levi is present, so if a Kohen was already called up, then next has to either be Kohen, that same Kohen needs to receive the Levi's Aliyah, or a Levi needs to be, the next first goes Kohen and then Levi and then Yisrael. If there's no Levi, then the Kohen would receive two. If there is a Levi, then a Levi must be called up. But once there was no Kohen present, then you don't need to call up a Levi. Meaning if there isn't this, by a Levi, you don't have the concept of people being concerned that maybe something's wrong in his family. Because if a man there's no woman that a man that's a Levi is not allowed to marry over any other Jew. The marriage restrictions are only on a Kohen and not on a Levi. So if there's a Levi in Shul and you don't give him an Aliyah, people are not going to say, hey, maybe he's not a Levi, because if they know he's a Levi, then he is a Levi. There's no concern that he may have lost the status of Levi, because it is impossible to lose the status of Levi. So as long as the Kohen is present, then we must call up a Levi after him, because if you called up a Yisrael after the Kohen, then people again would think maybe the Kohen's not a Kohen, he's just another Levi. So in order to instill the integrity of a Kohen must always be called up. No other Kohen may be called after him. And if a Levi is present, a Levi must be called up. But that whole concern is specifically regarding a Kohen that has these marital restrictions. But regarding a Levi, if there wasn't a Kohen present, then either you could give the Aliyah to the Levi, or you could give it to anybody else that is present in the shul. And in such a case, we should call the most learned in Torah amongst those present, meaning there still is a concept that the more of Hashem's wisdom that a person has, that's what gives the person greater honor, and therefore he would be called up first, right? In every society, there are those people that are most respected, whether it be presidents or prime ministers or wealthy people or politicians. But in the Jewish community, the person that is given the highest level of respect is the person that is dedicated the most amount of time, as you all are showing on your daily Torah sessions. So you certainly would qualify more quickly for a greater level of honor for all the amount of Torah that you are studying. If there's no Kohen present, the Levi instead of and if there's no Kohen present, then the Gabbai would say whoever's being called up is being called up in the place of the Kohen, to clarify that he himself is not a Kohen. Okay. Once the Yisrael has been called up, then a Levi will not be called up after the Yisrael. In case somebody thinks that first person that called up was in fact a Kohen, or he thinks that the Levi was in fact a Kohen. So once a Levi can only be called up first or after a Kohen. Okay, a community made up of only Kohanim or Leviim should put the question to a learned sage as how to conduct themselves. If everybody in the community and over the ages, there have been such communities. It could be specifically if you have a large family. Let's say you want to go away on a family get together, and you book out in a hotel, and you take a Torah with you. There are halachos of when you can and can't take a Torah with you, but you do. And everybody in the family are Kohanim. It's a few brothers, and they all got sons, and you have a beautiful minyan. So that a rabbi would need to be consulted how one would go about that. Okay. So that is that is as far as who gets called up first, second, and third. What we'll discuss next is what happens if the person that you're wanting to give an aliyah to is actually in the middle of davening. Would he stop his davening in order to receive the aliyah, or should you give her an aliyah to somebody who's in the middle of davening, which might cause him to have to interrupt his prayers? Stay tuned tomorrow for what to do if somebody is in the middle of his prayers and you want to give him an aliyah. Thank you for joining us, and wishing you a wonderful evening and